The words still echo in my mind even now, sitting in my corner office overlooking Manhattan. "You're too emotional, Miss Rivera. This industry requires steel, not tears." Richard Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Industries, had said it with such casual cruelty, as if destroying my entire world was just another item on his Tuesday agenda. I remember how my hands trembled as I packed my desk, how the other employees avoided eye contact, how the security guard escorted me out like I was some kind of criminal. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that within 4 hours of leaving that building, I would be sitting across from his biggest rival, signing a contract that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're watching this, if you've ever been told you're too much of something, too emotional, too sensitive, too ambitious, too anything, then this story is for you. Because sometimes the very thing they use to break you becomes the weapon you use to build your empire. So please, like this video if you've ever felt underestimated, and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Your support means everything, and I promise, what happens next will show you that sometimes getting fired is the best thing that can ever happen to you. My name is Sofia Rivera, and 6 months ago I was nobody. Well, that's not entirely true. I was somebody to the people who mattered least, and nobody to the people who mattered most. At 23, I was the youngest senior analyst at Blackstone Industries, a massive consulting firm that practically owned half of corporate America's strategic decisions. But being young and female in that Shark Tank meant I might as well have been invisible, except when they needed someone to blame or someone to fetch coffee for the real executives. The morning it all changed started like any other. I arrived at 6:30 a.m., an hour before most of the senior staff, because that's what you do when you're trying to prove you belong somewhere that doesn't want you. The November rain was pounding against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 40th floor office, and I remember thinking how appropriate it was. Even the weather knew this place was miserable. I had spent the entire weekend preparing a presentation that could save our biggest client from bankruptcy. Not that anyone would know it was my work. That's how things operated at Blackstone. The young analysts did the work and the senior partners took the credit. My desk was in what we called the pit, an open floor plan designed to remind us junior employees that we weren't important enough for walls. Above us, literally and figuratively, were the glass offices of the partners, where they could look down at us like we were animals in a zoo. Richard Blackstone's office was the biggest, naturally a monument to his ego that probably cost more than most people's houses. He was the kind of man who wore his cruelty like an expensive suit, tailored, refined, and impossible to ignore. I had been working on the Morrison Industries account for 3 months. Morrison Industries was hemorrhaging money, and they'd come to Blackstone desperate for a solution. The senior partners had thrown every conventional strategy at them, cost-cutting, restructuring, layoffs, but nothing was working. What they didn't understand was that Morrison's problem wasn't their expenses. It was their entire business model. They were trying to compete in a digital world with analog thinking. I saw it immediately, probably because I was the only person under 40 on the entire team. So I did what I always did. I stayed late, worked weekends, and built an entirely new strategy from scratch. I created a digital transformation plan that would revolutionize Morrison's operations, including a proprietary software system that I had actually helped code myself. Yes, the too emotional girl knew how to code. Funny how they never bothered to read my resume closely enough to see my computer science minor. The presentation was scheduled for that morning at 9. James Whitman, the senior partner officially in charge of the Morrison account, had been out playing golf with clients for the past 2 weeks while I did all the work. He showed up that morning at 8:45, reeking of whiskey from whatever bar he'd closed down the night before, and held out his hand for my presentation materials. "Great work on this, Sophia," he said, not even looking at me. "I'll make sure to mention your contribution in the meeting." We both knew he was lying. In the 18 months I'd been at Blackstone, James had mentioned my contribution exactly 0 times. But what choice did I have? This was how the game was played. You did the work, They took the credit, and maybe, if you were lucky and patient and willing to sacrifice another decade of your life, they'd let you sit at the big kids' table. I watched from my desk as the parade of suits filed into Conference Room A, the one with the best view, where all the important meetings happened. Through the glass walls, I could see my presentation on the screen, my months of work reduced to James's name on the title slide. Richard Blackstone was there, of course, presiding over everything like some kind of corporate king. The Morrison Industries executives looked skeptical at first, then intrigued, then excited. By the end of the hour, they were shaking hands and laughing, and I knew my strategy had worked. That should have been my moment of triumph. Instead, it became my moment of humiliation. What happened next still makes my blood boil, even now. James, riding high on his successful presentation, decided to celebrate by taking the entire senior team out for a liquid lunch. They returned around 2 p.m., loud and obnoxious, their expensive suits slightly disheveled, their voices carrying across the entire floor. James was the worst of them, his face flushed red, his voice slurring slightly as he regaled Richard with stories about how he'd saved the Morrison account. I tried to ignore them, to focus on my work, but then James said something that made me look up. "You know what the problem with this generation is, Richard? They don't understand that business is about relationships, not spreadsheets. Take that girl, for instance." He pointed directly at me, not even bothering to use my name. "She thinks because she can make pretty PowerPoints, she understands strategy. But she doesn't have the stomach for real business. Too soft, too emotional." The entire floor went silent. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen. I felt my face burning, my hands clenching into fists under my desk. 6 months of 80-hour weeks. 6 months of doing their work while they took the credit. 6 months of being called sweetheart and honey, and being asked to take notes in meetings where I was the only one who actually understood the subject matter. I stood up. I don't even remember making the decision to do it. My body just moved on its own. "That was my presentation," I said, my voice carrying across the silent floor. Every slide, every strategy, every line of code in that software proposal, I created all of it. James laughed, the ugly sound echoing off the glass walls. "You see, Richard? This is what I mean. So emotional. Can't handle the realities of business. Maybe if she spent less time whining and more time learning from her superiors." "Learning what exactly?" I interrupted, my voice stronger now. "How to take credit for other people's work. How to show up drunk to meetings. How to lose 3 major accounts in 6 months because you're too busy playing golf to actually read the market reports." The color drained from James's face. Richard Blackstone stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he would take my side. After all, I had just saved one of their biggest accounts. Instead, he looked at me with those cold gray eyes and said, "Miss Rivera, please gather your things. Your services are no longer required at Blackstone Industries." "You're firing me?" I couldn't believe it. "I just saved the Morrison account. That strategy will make this firm millions. You're too emotional," he said, cutting me off with surgical precision. "This industry requires steel, not tears. We need people who understand that business is about hierarchy, respect, and knowing your place. You clearly don't possess these qualities. Security will escort you out." The humiliation of that walk to my desk, packing my things while everyone watched, still haunts me. The security guard, Tom, who I'd said good morning to every day for 18 months, couldn't even look me in the eye as he escorted me to the elevator. The box of my possessions, a coffee mug my mom had given me, a small plant, a few personal items, felt pathetically light in my arms. 18 months of my life, and it all fit in one small box. The elevator ride down felt endless. 40 floors of shame and anger and disbelief. By the time I reached the lobby, it had started to rain harder, because of course it had. I stood under the awning of the Blackstone building, clutching my pathetic box, watching the rain pour down, and for the first time in my professional life, I cried. Not the pretty, single-tear kind of crying you see in movies, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that I couldn't control. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Rough day?" I turned around, wiping my eyes, embarrassed to be caught crying by a stranger. But it wasn't a stranger. It was Daniel Morrison. Yes, that Morrison, as in Morrison Industries, the company I had just saved. He was standing there with an umbrella, looking at me with what seemed like genuine concern. "Mr. Morrison?" I managed to say through my tears. "What are you doing here?" "I came back to thank the person who actually created that presentation," he said simply. "I've been in business for 30 years, Miss Rivera. I know when someone's reading someone else's work. James Whitman could barely pronounce half the technical terms in that proposal, let alone understand them." I stared at him, stunned. "You knew?" "Of course I knew. I also know that Richard Blackstone just made the biggest mistake of his career by firing you." He paused, studying me carefully. "I have a proposition for you if you're interested. But first, let's get out of this rain. There's a coffee shop around the corner." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, mascara probably streaked down my face, clutching a hot cup of coffee like it was a lifeline. Daniel Morrison was nothing like what I expected. Where Richard Blackstone was all sharp edges and cold calculation, Daniel was warm, genuine, and surprisingly funny. He told me about starting Morrison Industries in his garage 25 years ago, about the mistakes he'd made, about how he'd almost lost everything twice before building it into the empire it was today. "Here's the thing, Sophia. May I call you Sophia?" he asked, and I nodded. "Morrison Industries needs someone like you, not just for your technical skills, though those are impressive. We need someone who understands that emotion isn't weakness, it's strength. The best business decisions I've ever made came from my gut, from caring too much, from being too emotional, as they say." "But I just got fired," I said, still in shock. "Doesn't that concern you?" Daniel laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "Concern me? It thrills me. It means I can hire you before anyone else realizes what Blackstone just threw away. I'm not just offering you a job, Sophia. I'm offering you the chance to build something, your own division, your own team, implementing the exact strategy you presented this morning. And here's the kicker. We're going to use it to destroy Blackstone Industries." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Destroy them? That seems emotional?" He grinned. "Maybe, but they've had a monopoly on corporate consulting for too long, and they've gotten lazy, cruel, and stupid. Your strategy isn't just going to save Morrison Industries, it's going to transform us into Blackstone's biggest competitor. The question is, do you want to be the one leading that charge?" My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from James Whitman. "Hope you learned your lesson about knowing your place. Good luck finding anyone else who will hire an emotional little girl who can't handle real business." I showed it to Daniel, who read it and shook his head. "Please tell me you'll take my offer, if only so I can see James's face when he realizes his emotional little girl is about to eat his lunch." That's how, 4 hours after being escorted out of Blackstone Industries in shame, I found myself signing a contract with Morrison Industries for triple my previous salary, with my own team, my own division, and a mandate to implement the strategy that Blackstone had just thrown away along with me. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it was just beginning. My first day at Morrison Industries was surreal. Instead of a desk in a pit, I had an actual office, with walls and a door and a window with a view. My name was on the door. Sophia Rivera, Vice President of Digital Strategy. Vice President, at 23. When my mom saw it, she cried. Daniel had given me carte blanche to build my team, and I knew exactly who I wanted. Remember how I said everyone at Blackstone avoided eye contact when I was fired? That wasn't entirely true. There were 3 people who had texted me that night, telling me how wrong it was, how sorry they were. 3 other analysts who had been suffering in silence, doing the work while watching the senior partners take the credit. I hired all 3 of them within a week. Marcus Chen was a coding genius who had been stuck making coffee runs for partners who couldn't even turn on their computers without help. Jennifer Park had a PhD in behavioral economics, but was regularly asked to smile more in meetings. And David Thompson, despite having closed more deals than any other junior analyst, was constantly passed over for promotions because he didn't go to the right schools or play golf at the right clubs. Together, we were the island of misfit toys, the rejects from Blackstone's perfect corporate machine, and we were about to show them what a mistake they'd made. The strategy I had created wasn't just about digital transformation, it was about completely reimagining how corporate consulting worked. Instead of the old model where consultants swooped in, charged astronomical fees, made recommendations and left, we embedded ourselves with our clients. We built custom software solutions. We trained their teams. We measured success not by billable hours, but by actual results. Within a month, we had signed 3 new clients, all of them companies that Blackstone had been courting for years. Within 2 months, we had doubled Morrison Industries' consulting revenue. Within 3 months, the Wall Street Journal was writing articles about the Morrison method and how it was disrupting the entire consulting industry. But the real satisfaction came in month 4, when we went after Blackstone's clients directly. You see, I knew all of Blackstone's weaknesses. I knew which clients were unhappy, which contracts were up for renewal, which partners were dropping the ball. And I used that knowledge strategically, surgically, and yes, emotionally. The first domino to fall was Hartman Financial. They had been with Blackstone for 15 years, but their CEO, Patricia Hartman, had been growing increasingly frustrated with the firm's outdated approaches and astronomical fees. I knew this because I had been in the meetings where James Whitman had dismissed her concerns, telling her she didn't understand the complexities of what they were doing. I called Patricia directly. Ms. Hartman, this is Sophia Rivera from Morrison Industries. I believe we met briefly at the Blackstone offices a few months ago. I was the analyst who suggested the blockchain solution for your international transfers before Mr. Whitman said it was too experimental. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I remember you. You're the one they fired for speaking up in that meeting. The very same. And I'm calling to tell you that blockchain solution is not only not experimental, but we've successfully implemented it for 3 clients in the past month. Would you like to see the results? 2 weeks later, Hartman Financial signed with Morrison Industries, taking their $50 million annual consulting budget with them. The day the announcement went public, Blackstone's stock dropped 3 points. The second domino was Green Tech Solutions, a sustainable energy company that had been trying to get Blackstone to understand their vision for years. The senior partners at Blackstone thought renewable energy was a fad, a liberal conspiracy that would blow over. I knew better, and so did my team. We pitched Green Tech a comprehensive strategy that not only understood their mission, but enhanced it, using AI-driven optimization to increase their energy output by 30% while reducing costs. When Green Tech's CEO, Robert Greene, called Richard Blackstone to inform him they were switching to Morrison Industries, Richard apparently threw his coffee mug against the wall. I know this because his assistant, who had always been kind to me, sent me a text with a photo of the coffee stain and a simple message. He knows it was you. Good, I wanted him to know. But the third domino, that was the one that really mattered. You see, Blackstone Industries itself was a client of a major investment firm called Phoenix Capital. Phoenix Capital managed Blackstone's pension funds, their executive investments, basically all of their financial planning. And Phoenix Capital's CEO, Margaret Phoenix, happened to be Daniel Morrison's golf partner. It took some convincing. Margaret was old school, loyal to her business relationships. But when Daniel showed her the numbers, how Morrison Industries was outperforming Blackstone by every metric, how we were stealing their clients, how their stock was in free fall, she agreed to a meeting. I'll never forget walking into Phoenix Capital's boardroom. It was even more impressive than Blackstone's, all dark wood and leather and power. Margaret Phoenix sat at the head of the table, a woman in her 60s who looked like she could buy and sell small countries before breakfast. So, she said, looking directly at me. "You're the emotional little girl who's causing Richard Blackstone so much trouble." "I prefer passionate young woman who's revolutionizing the consulting industry, but yes, that's me." She laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "I like you. Show me what you've got." For the next 2 hours, I presented not just our strategy for Phoenix Capital, but a complete analysis of why Blackstone Industries was a sinking ship. I had the numbers, the projections, the client satisfaction scores. I showed her how Blackstone's refusal to adapt, their toxic culture, and their outdated methods were going to destroy them within 5 years, with or without my help. Although, I added at the end, with my help, we can make it happen in 2. Margaret was silent for a long moment after I finished. Then she stood up, walked over to me, and shook my hand. "Welcome to the Phoenix Capital family, Miss Rivera. Let's burn some bridges together." The day Phoenix Capital announced they were dropping Blackstone Industries and signing with Morrison Industries was the day Richard Blackstone called me personally. I was in my office, reviewing contracts with my team, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Sophia, there's a Richard Blackstone on line 1. Should I tell him you're unavailable?" I looked at my team, Marcus, Jennifer, and David, who had all frozen in place. They knew this moment was coming. We all did. "No," I said, picking up the phone. "I'll take it." I put him on speaker so my team could hear. "Mr. Blackstone, what a surprise." "Cut the crap, Rivera." His voice was tight with rage. "You think you're clever, don't you? Stealing my clients, turning my own strategies against me." "I'm not stealing anything," I replied calmly. "Your clients are choosing to work with a firm that values innovation, respects its employees, and delivers actual results. And they're not your strategies. They're mine. You fired me, remember?" "You're too emotional," he spat, falling back on his favorite insult. "This vendetta of yours proves it. Real business professionals don't operate on spite." "You're right," I said, surprising him into silence. "I am emotional. I'm passionate about my work. I care about my clients. I get angry when I see injustice and excited when I see opportunity. And you know what? That emotion has made me more money in 4 months than you made all of last year. My emotion built a team that trusts each other. My emotion created strategies that actually work. My emotion is the reason Morrison Industries is now valued higher than Blackstone Industries for the first time in history." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, heavy and angry. "So yes, Mr. Blackstone, I'm emotional. And that emotion is going to destroy everything you built on the backs of people like me. Have a wonderful day." I hung up. My team erupted in cheers. Marcus actually stood on his chair and applauded. Jennifer was crying, emotional tears of joy. David just sat there grinning, shaking his head in disbelief. "Did you really just hang up on Richard Blackstone?" he asked. I really did. And Morrison Industries is really valued higher than Blackstone. As of this morning's market close, yes. And we really did all of this in 4 months. We really did. That night, Daniel Morrison took our entire team out to celebrate. Not to some stuffy business dinner at an overpriced steakhouse, but to a karaoke bar in Koreatown, where we sang badly, laughed loudly, and were thoroughly, unapologetically emotional about our success. "You know what the funny thing is?" Daniel said to me at one point, raising his beer in a toast. "Richard Blackstone was right about one thing. You are too emotional for his kind of business. Thank God for that." The next 6 months were a whirlwind. Morrison Industries' consulting division grew by 400%. We hired 50 new employees, all of them brilliant minds who had been overlooked, underestimated, or undervalued by traditional firms. We created a company culture where emotion wasn't just tolerated, but celebrated. Where passion was an asset, not a liability. Where crying in a meeting because you cared so much about a project wasn't weakness, but strength. We landed contracts with tech giants, financial institutions, healthcare companies, nonprofits. Each client came to us because they wanted something different, something real, something created by people who actually gave a damn about their success. Meanwhile, Blackstone Industries was hemorrhaging clients and employees. The toxic culture that had been hidden behind success for so long was now exposed for everyone to see. James Whitman was fired after 3 more clients left, specifically because of him. Other senior partners jumped ship, sensing the company was sinking. Stock prices plummeted. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Remember Tom, the security guard who had escorted me out that awful day? He called me one evening, 6 months after I'd been fired. Ms. Rivera, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the Morrison Industries website. Tom, of course I don't mind. How are you? I'm calling because I thought you should know something. I'm quitting Blackstone tomorrow, but before I go, I wanted to tell you what I've been seeing. It turned out Tom had been watching, listening, and documenting everything. Security guards are invisible to people like Richard Blackstone, just part of the furniture. But Tom heard every conversation in the elevator, every phone call in the lobby, every whispered discussion by the water cooler. Mr. Blackstone has been doing some things, Tom said carefully. Illegal things. Moving money around, hiding losses, lying to investors. I have recordings, documents he threw away thinking they were shredded. I didn't know what to do with them. But then I thought of you. My heart was racing. Tom, are you sure about this? Dead sure. I've been working security for 30 years, Ms. Rivera. I know criminal behavior when I see it. The question is, what do you want me to do with this information? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Send everything to the SEC and the Wall Street Journal. But Tom, make sure you're protected. Do you need a lawyer? Already got one, thanks to you. Paid for with the bonus Mr. Morrison sent me after I told him I was the one who called you about Blackstone's illegal activities. Oh, didn't I mention? I've been working for Morrison Industries' security team for the past month. Mr. Morrison hired me the day after you told him how I couldn't look you in the eye that day. Said anyone with that much conscience was exactly who he wanted protecting his company. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Daniel Morrison never ceased to amaze me. The story broke 3 days later. Blackstone Industries under federal investigation for fraud. Richard Blackstone was arrested at his country club, dragged away in handcuffs in front of all his society friends. The image was on the front page of every business publication in the country. James Whitman, trying to save himself, turned state's evidence and revealed even more criminal activity. It turned out the toxic culture at Blackstone went deeper than just stealing credit and dismissing emotions. They had been defrauding clients for years, hiding it behind complicated financial instruments and legal jargon. Within a month, Blackstone Industries had declared bankruptcy. The company that had seemed invincible, that had ruled the consulting world for 3 decades, was gone. Destroyed not by market forces or competition, but by their own arrogance, cruelty, and criminal behavior. The day the bankruptcy was announced, I received a package at my office. Inside was a single piece of paper with 2 words written in Richard Blackstone's handwriting. You win. I framed it. It hangs in my office right next. To my favorite quote, she was told she was too emotional for business, so she started her own. But winning wasn't about destroying Blackstone, not really. It was about building something better. Morrison Industries' consulting division became the model for a new kind of corporate culture. We proved that emotion and business weren't mutually exclusive, that caring about your work and your colleagues made you stronger, not weaker. We implemented policies that would have made Richard Blackstone's head explode. Mental health days, crying rooms for when the stress got too much, celebration parties for every win, no matter how small. A mentorship program where senior staff were required to credit junior employees for their contributions. Transparent salary structures. Promotions based on merit, not golf handicaps. And it worked. God, did it work. Our employee satisfaction scores were the highest in the industry. Our client retention rate was 98%. We were making money hand over fist, not despite our emotional approach, but because of it. A year after I was fired from Blackstone, Forbes did a profile on me. The Emotional Executive: How Sofia Rivera Revolutionized Corporate Culture. The journalist asked me if I had any regrets about how things went down with Blackstone. Just one, I told her. I wish I had been even more emotional. I wish I had stood up sooner, spoken louder, cared more visibly. My emotion wasn't my weakness. It was my superpower. It just took getting fired for me to realize it. The article came out the same week Richard Blackstone was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. James Whitman got 5 years. Most of the other senior partners were either in jail, under investigation, or had fled the country. But the best part, the absolute best part, happened at the Forbes Women in Business Summit that year. I was giving the keynote speech about emotional intelligence in leadership when I saw her in the audience, Patricia Hartman, the CEO who had been one of the first to leave Blackstone for Morrison. After my speech, she came up to me with tears in her eyes. "I need to tell you something," she said. 30 years ago, I was fired from my first job for being too emotional. I was told I'd never make it in business, that I needed to be harder, colder, more like the men. So I spent 3 decades trying to be someone I wasn't, and it nearly killed me. Watching you embrace your emotions, use them as strength. You didn't just save my company, Sophia. You saved me. We hugged right there in front of everyone, 2 emotional women in business, crying and not giving a damn who saw it. That night I called my mom to tell her about the summit. She had been my rock through everything, the one who reminded me that feeling things deeply was a gift, not a curse. "Mija," she said in Spanish, the way she always did when she was proud. "You know what the best revenge is?" "Success?" I guessed. "No, baby. The best revenge is living authentically. You showed them that the very thing they tried to use to break you was actually your greatest strength. That's not revenge, that's revolution." She was right, of course. Moms always are. The revolution spread beyond just Morrison Industries. Other companies started adopting our policies, our approaches, our belief that emotion and business could coexist. Business schools started teaching courses on emotional intelligence. The old guard, the Richard Blackstones of the world, found themselves increasingly obsolete. Marcus, Jennifer, and David all became executives in their own right, leading divisions and mentoring the next generation of emotional leaders. Marcus started a coding boot camp for underrepresented minorities in tech. Jennifer wrote a book on behavioral economics that became required reading at Harvard Business School. David launched a nonprofit that provided consulting services to small businesses that couldn't afford traditional firms. And me, I became CEO of Morrison Industries' consulting division at 25, the youngest CEO in the Fortune 500. The Wall Street Journal did a piece on it with the headline, "From Fired to Fortune 500, the Sofia Rivera Story." But my favorite article was a small piece in an industry newsletter that simply said, "Sofia Rivera proves that being too emotional in business isn't a flaw, it's the future." Daniel Morrison retired last year, handing over the reins of the entire company to me. At the ceremony, he said something I'll never forget. 30 years ago, I started this company in my garage with nothing but passion and determination. I was told I was too emotional, too invested, too caring to make it in business. Sound familiar? Sophia, you're not just my successor. You're the validation of everything I've always believed. Business isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about people, and people are emotional. Thank God for that. The company is now valued at 10 times what Blackstone was at its peak. We have offices in 30 countries. We employ thousands of people, all of whom know that their emotions are valued, their contributions matter, and their voices will be heard. But I still keep that box from my last day at Blackstone, the pathetic little box with my coffee mug and my plant. It sits on a shelf in my office as a reminder that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the beginning of everything you were meant to be. Young employees sometimes ask me for advice, especially young women who are struggling in toxic corporate environments. I always tell them the same thing. Your emotions are not your weakness. They're your intelligence, your intuition, your humanity. The people who tell you you're too emotional are really saying they're scared of your power, because someone who cares, who feels, who isn't afraid to show it, that's someone who can change the world. Last month, I was at a conference in Singapore when I ran into someone unexpected, Richard Blackstone's daughter, Emily. She was fresh out of business school, bright-eyed and eager, nothing like her father. She approached me nervously after my presentation. "Ms. Rivera, I know you have every reason to hate me because of my father, but I had to tell you something. I watched everything that happened. I saw how he treated people, how he built his empire on cruelty and theft, and I saw how you rebuilt something better from the ashes. You're the reason I went to business school, but more importantly, you're the reason I'm not going to be like him. I'm going to be emotional. I'm going to care. I'm going to build something that matters." I hired her on the spot, because that's what emotional people do. We see potential where others see problems. We forgive when we could seek revenge. We build when we could destroy. Richard Blackstone was right about one thing. I was too emotional for his kind of business. But he was wrong about everything else. My emotion wasn't a flaw to be fixed or a weakness to be hidden. It was the exact thing the business world needed. It was the thing that let me see solutions others missed, build relationships others couldn't, inspire loyalty others could only buy. 3 years after that humiliating day when I was escorted out of Blackstone Industries, I was invited to give the commencement speech at my old business school. I stood in front of 500 eager graduates, all ready to conquer the corporate world, and I told them my story. The whole thing. The humiliation, the tears, the anger, the triumph. "They're going to tell you you're too something," I said, looking out at all those young faces. "Too emotional, too ambitious, too different, too much. And when they do, I want you to remember this. The only thing you can be too much of is someone else's idea of who you should be. Be too emotional, be too passionate, be too much, because the world doesn't need more robots in suits. It needs humans who give a damn." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. I cried through most of it, and I didn't care who saw. After the speech, a young woman came up to me, tears streaming down her face. "I got fired last week," she said, "for pushing back on my boss's sexist comments. He said I was too sensitive, too emotional, couldn't handle the real world. I was ready to give up on business entirely. But after hearing your story, I'm going to start my own company, and I'm going to hire every too emotional person I can find." I gave her my card. "Call me when you're ready to launch. Morrison Industries loves investing in emotional entrepreneurs." She did call, 6 months later. Her company is now one of our biggest success stories, a tech startup that's revolutionizing mental health care in the workplace. Her first hire? Tom, the security guard, who became her head of operations. Because emotional people recognize other emotional people, and we lift each other up. The business world has changed dramatically since that rainy day when I stood outside Blackstone Industries, crying and clutching my pathetic box of belongings. Emotional intelligence is now considered essential for leadership. Companies compete to create the most human-centered cultures. The old guard, the ones who believed in crushing spirits and stealing credit, they're relics now, cautionary tales told in business schools about how not to run a company. But the biggest change? It's in how we define strength. Strength isn't hiding your feelings behind a poker face. It's not crushing others to climb higher. It's not being steel instead of human. Real strength is crying in a meeting because you care so much about getting it right. It's standing up to injustice even when it costs you everything. It's building others up instead of tearing them down. It's being emotional in a world that tells you not to be. Richard Blackstone is out of prison now, released early for good behavior. I heard he's working as a janitor at a small office building in Newark. James Whitman teaches business ethics at a community college. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Most of the other Blackstone partners have either reinvented themselves or disappeared entirely. And me? I'm still emotional. I cried last week when we landed a contract that will create 10,000 jobs. I got angry yesterday when I found out one of our competitors was underpaying their female employees. I felt joy this morning when Marcus called to tell me his daughter was accepted to MIT. I feel everything, deeply and unapologetically. And that feeling, that emotion, that thing they tried to use to destroy me, it built an empire. But more than that, it built a different kind of business world. One where a young woman can walk into a boardroom and be herself, emotions and all. Where caring about your work isn't seen as weakness, but as essential. Where too emotional is a compliment, not an insult. Sometimes I drive past the old Blackstone building. It's a WeWork now, filled with startups and entrepreneurs, people building dreams instead of crushing them. There's a coffee shop on the ground floor where that awful lobby used to be. I stop there sometimes, order a latte, and sit in the same spot where I once stood crying in the rain. But I don't cry anymore. I smile, because I know something now that I didn't know then. They were right. I was too emotional for their world. Thank God for that. Because it forced me to build my own world, one where emotion isn't just accepted, it's celebrated, valued, and recognized as the superpower it's always been. The last time I was there, a young woman recognized me. She was maybe 22, fresh-faced and eager, probably an intern at one of the startups upstairs. "You're Sofia Rivera," she said, eyes wide. "You're the reason I'm in business. My professor said you proved that. Emotional intelligence is the future of leadership." "What company are you with?" I asked. She named a small consulting firm I'd never heard of. "But actually," she said, lowering her voice, "I'm thinking of leaving. My boss keeps telling me I'm too invested in our clients, too emotional about the work. He says I need to be more professional, more detached." I handed her my business card. "Come see me Monday. Morrison Industries is always looking for people who care too much." She looked at the card like it was made of gold. "Really? But I'm nobody. I'm just an intern who can't stop caring about everything." "That's exactly who I was," I told her. "And look how that turned out." As I left the coffee shop that day, I thought about the cycle of it all. How many Richard Blackstones are still out there, telling bright young people they're too emotional? How many potential revolutionaries are being crushed by toxic cultures and outdated thinking? Too many, but also fewer than before. Because every time someone stands up and says, "Yes, I'm emotional, and that's my strength," the old way dies a little more. The truth is, business has always been emotional. Every purchase, every partnership, every innovation, they're all driven by human feelings. Want, need, fear, hope, ambition, love. The Richard Blackstones of the world tried to pretend otherwise, to turn business into a cold, calculating machine. But machines don't innovate. They don't inspire. They don't build lasting relationships or create meaningful change. People do. Emotional people do. So to anyone watching this who's been told they're too emotional, too sensitive, too much of anything, listen to me very carefully. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. Your emotions are not your weakness. They're your guidance system, your creativity, your connection to others. The people who tell you to be less emotional are really telling you to be less human. Don't listen to them. Instead, do what I did. Take that emotion and channel it into something powerful. Let your caring drive you to excellence. Let your anger at injustice fuel your determination to build something better. Let your joy in others' success create a culture of celebration and support. Be emotional. Be passionate. Be human. Because the world has enough robots in suits making spreadsheets and stealing credit. What it needs is people who give a damn, who feel deeply, who aren't afraid to cry in the boardroom or laugh in the middle of a serious meeting. It needs people like you, like me, like all of us who were told we were too emotional for business and decided to prove that business was too unemotional for us. 3 years ago, Richard Blackstone told me I was too emotional and fired me. That afternoon, I was hired by his biggest competitor. Today, his company is gone, and mine is thriving. He's a cautionary tale, and I'm a case study in business schools around the world. But the real victory isn't in the money or the accolades or even the sweet satisfaction of watching your former tormentors fall. The real victory is in the thousands of employees who now know their emotions are valued. It's in the clients who get to work with people who actually care about their success. It's in the young women and men who see that there's another way to do business, a better way, a more human way. The real victory is that somewhere out there, right now, someone is being told they're too emotional for business. And instead of believing it, instead of trying to change themselves, they're thinking about my story. They're realizing that maybe, just maybe, being emotional isn't their problem. It's their power. To that person, wherever you are, whatever you're facing, I want you to know this: your day is coming. The same emotion they're trying to crush is going to be the thing that sets you free. It might not happen today or tomorrow. You might have to endure some pain first, some humiliation, some dark nights of the soul. But one day, you're going to stand in your own office, in your own company, surrounded by people who value everything about you, including especially your emotions. And you're going to look back on the person who told you that you were too emotional, and you're going to realize they did you the biggest favor of your life. They set you free to be yourself, and yourself, emotional and all, is exactly who the world needs. My name is Sofia Rivera. I'm the CEO of Morrison Industries. I cry in board meetings. I get angry at injustice. I celebrate every victory like it's the first one. I am emotional. I am successful, and I am proof that the two aren't just compatible, they're inseparable. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story moved you, and if you believe that everyone deserves to have their true worth seen, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below and tell me, what was the moment in the story that resonated with you the most? And if you want more powerful stories about finding your strength and overcoming the odds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.